economics of inequality and poverty. First, we need to talk about the difference between equality and equity. Equality is focused on sameness. That means it is observable and measurable. You can measure and observe equality because it is objective. We can measure, observe equality because basically you look at, are people the same? Equity, on the other hand, is a subjective concept. It is more concerned with fairness, and therefore it is not measurable, not quantifiable. Okay? So even though the goal is to have more equity in the distribution of income, a fairer distribution of income, we can't measure that. So the only thing we can measure is equality, how much inequality exists, and then people will disagree on whether that's fair or not. Okay? So what are the types of economic inequality? There is an unequal distribution of income and an unequal distribution of wealth. Income is what people earn. Okay? People earn wages, interest, rent, and profit. Wages come from labor, interest comes from capital, rent comes from land, profit comes from enterprise. So unequal earning of income is basically an unequal distribution of income. Wealth, on the other hand, is what people own. What people own is equal to their assets, things that they own, minus their liabilities. Obviously, the more wealth you have, the more income you can earn because you can put these assets to use and use them to earn income. Okay? But there are two types of economic inequality. There is inequality in the distribution of income, what people earn, and inequality in the distribution of wealth, what people own minus what they owe. Okay? So liabilities is what they owe. All right? Fabulous. Now, how do we measure economic inequality? We use the Lorenz curve and the Gini coefficient. All right, my lovelies. Let me go back to diagrams. Okay. The Lorenz curve. Basically, you have cumulative percentage of income on the y-axis and cumulative percentage of population on the x-axis. In a perfectly equal society, 20% of the population will earn 20% of the income. 40% will earn 40%, 60 will earn 60, and so on and so forth. So this diagonal is the line of perfect equality or absolute equality. Now, then you measure the actual distribution of income. So 20% of the population earn this much, 40% earn this much, 60% earn this much, and so on and so forth. The further away you are from the line of absolute equality, the more unequal. The closer you are to the line of absolute equality, the more equal. So here it's showing you the Lorenz curve before and after redistribution. So before the policies to redistribute income. Ideally, policies that help you redistribute income should move the country's Lorenz curve closer to the line of absolute equality. Now, from the Lorenz curve, we derive the Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient is basically, let's assume we're trying to measure the Gini coefficient for the orange Lorenz curve. Basically, it's the area between the Lorenz curve and the line of absolute equality. We'll call this area A, divided by the total area under the line of absolute equality. So if we call this here area B, the Gini index is basically Gini coefficient or index is basically area A, which is between the line of absolute equality and the Lorenz curve, divided by area A plus B, which is both areas, the total triangle under the line of absolute equality. Now, the Gini coefficient lies between 0 and 1. 0 means this society has perfect equality. 1 means it has perfect inequality. Okay, so the Gini coefficient will always be somewhere between 0 and 1. Are there any questions so far before I move on?
I have a question regarding like IB exams.
Yes.
I heard from our teacher that the Lorenz curve, we need to draw it as like a perfect square, like square shape, like during the test. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, yeah, because you have 100% here and 100% here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you are asked to construct the Lorenz curve, Talal, they will give you graph paper. This is usually going to be a paper 3, and there will be graph paper, so you'll be able to construct the axes.
Oh, okay.
Okay? All right, my lovelies. So, any questions about economic inequality and how it's measured? Awesome. Let's talk about poverty. Poverty is basically not having enough income to secure what we call a decent standard of living or a minimum standard of living. There is absolute poverty and there is relative poverty. Absolute poverty is basically not being able to cover necessities, the necessities of food, clothing, and shelter. If you cannot cover necessities, you are absolutely poor. You are experiencing absolute poverty. Okay? Anything below the international poverty line, anybody living below the international poverty line, which recently was revised to $2.15. I think it was revised in 2022. I might be wrong. Actually, I'm probably right. Okay? $2.15. Anybody living below this per day suffers from absolute poverty. Relative poverty, you can cover necessities, but your income is below the average for your community. Okay, so if you can cover your necessities, but your income is still below the average of whatever community you live in, you are experiencing relative poverty. So think of absolute poverty. A homeless man is experiencing absolute poverty. Think of a single mother with 2 jobs and 3 kids. We see that in Hollywood movies and TV shows a lot. A single parent with 2 jobs and 3 kids struggling to make ends meet, they're experiencing relative poverty. Okay? All right. So we use single indicators to measure poverty, like international poverty lines and minimum income standards. International poverty lines are used to measure absolute poverty, while minimum income standards are used to estimate relative poverty. And then we use composite indicators like the MPI, Multi-Dimensional Poverty Index. So I'm going to tell you something interesting. Using international poverty lines, there's an estimated 800 million people worldwide living in absolute poverty. Using the MPI, so not just looking at income, looking at access to energy, access to opportunities, access to electronics, access to basically all of these basic things, okay? The MPI estimates there are 1.6 billion people worldwide who are what we call multidimensionally poor. Do you see the difference? 1.6 billion is twice as much as 800 million. Okay, so this brings us to the difficulties in measuring poverty. First of all, poverty is very subjective. Okay, poverty means different things to different people, and therefore the indicators used to measure it are very subjective. You can see here, using international poverty lines, we estimate there are 800 million people worldwide who live in absolute poverty. Using the MPI, we estimate 1.6 billion. Okay, that is almost double. It's double, right? That shows that measuring poverty isn't easy because economists disagree on what poverty means and how to measure it. Also, poverty is usually measured using household surveys. Well, what about homeless people who don't live in a household? They're often ignored because it's really hard to measure the number of people who are homeless. Okay? So there are all these difficulties in measuring poverty. That doesn't mean we should not try to measure it. We still need to measure it because it informs government policy. Now, what are the causes of inequality and poverty? There are many listed in the syllabus. It might be an inequality of opportunity. Okay, some people have access to more opportunities so they can better themselves, improve their economic well-being, and escape poverty. Some people might not have access to opportunity. Different levels of resource ownership. The more resources you own, the more income you can generate, the less likely you're going to be poor. If you don't own any resources other than your labor, you're more likely to be poorer than a person who owns a lot of capital, a lot of land, and so on and so forth. Different levels of human capital. That's why your parents are sending you to good schools and hopefully good universities, right? The more education you have, the higher your level of human capital, the more you can put that into use to generate more income. Sometimes discrimination can be a cause of poverty, maybe because of your gender, your race in some countries, sexual orientation, gender identity. All of these things fall under others. Anything that leads to some kind of discrimination can be a cause of poverty. Unequal status and power. In many third world countries, especially military dictatorships and countries that have non-democratic governments, having more access to power and status creates more opportunities. Okay? Having less status and power creates less opportunities, so you're more likely to be stuck in poverty. Sometimes government tax and benefit policies can be a cause of inequality. If a government has generous tax cuts for the rich and very stingy unemployment benefits and benefits for the poor, over time, that's going to actually create more economic inequality. Globalization and technological change can be a cause of inequality and poverty, especially because when factories shut down and move to poorer countries where labor costs are cheaper, that is one of the side effects of globalization. That puts a lot of people out of jobs. Or technological change. A lot of people lose their jobs because machines can now do those jobs better and cheaper in the long run. So globalization can cause inequality and poverty. Market-based supply-side policies. Market-based supply-side policies might make the economy more efficient, and we'll get to those next week, but they often increase the gap between the rich and the poor. Market-based supply-side policies are very pro-business and anti-worker. They empower business owners and rich people, but they leave workers vulnerable and falling behind. So what is the impact of inequality? Why should we care about inequality? Because inequality, too much inequality, can actually slow down economic growth. Poorer people and people who have less assets and less income are more likely to spend and keep the economy going. Rich people are very good at hoarding their riches and using it to buy useless things like yachts and big mansions. No offense to any of you who have any of those things. Okay, we call this conspicuous consumption. All right, the point is, an economy is more likely to grow when there's a smaller gap between the rich and the poor. Okay, standards of living is another very important thing. If there's a huge level of inequality and poverty, the standard of living of some might be improving, but the standard of living of others, they're falling behind. This is ruthless growth. Social stability. We've seen from history, the bigger the gap between the rich and the poor, the more likely you're going to have riots, revolutions, like the French Revolution, and so on and so forth. So it's important, even if you are rich and comfortable, it's important to care about the amount of inequality and poverty in your community, because you might think that doesn't impact me. It does. Okay? All right. Any questions before I move on? All right. So I just need 1 second just to grab a tissue. Okay, I lied. That was almost 5 seconds. All right. So the role of taxation in reducing poverty and inequality. All right. Taxes are one of the most popular ways to redistribute income. Remember, the idea is to redistribute income. By redistributing income, you will move over time the Lorenz curve closer to the line of absolute equality. Okay? Fabulous. Now, let's just first talk about progressive, regressive, and proportional taxes. Progressive taxes. As income increases, the tax rate increases. Y is income, TR is tax rate. Regressive. As income increases, the tax rate decreases. The best example of regressive taxes are all indirect taxes. Indirect taxes are regressive. That is one of the side effects of having too much of a reliance on indirect taxes. That doesn't mean that the government is using indirect taxes deliberately because they're regressive. It's just that's a byproduct of indirect taxes. Proportional taxes. As income increases, the tax rate remains fixed or the same, doesn't change. Okay? Now, which of those tax systems is better or the best at redistributing income? Progressive. So progressive taxes are the best at redistributing income, if this is one of the goals of the government. Proportional taxes are good or okay at redistributing income. Regressive taxes do not redistribute income. In fact, they lead to more inequality. So if a government wants to reduce economic inequality, it should try to make its taxes more progressive and try to reduce its reliance on indirect taxes. Okay, so to decrease inequality, a government should make income or direct taxes more progressive and reduce reliance on indirect taxes because they are very regressive. If that is the goal of the government, that's what you should do. If it's not the goal of the government, then it doesn't matter. Okay? All right, HL students, we'll go over average, marginal, and how it's measured and all of that. We'll do that when we do the HL stuff. All right, so keep in mind, there are two different types of taxes. Direct taxes are taxes on income. Income is what you earn. So taxes on wages, taxes on profit, taxes on rent, taxes on interest are all direct taxes. You can make those more progressive if you want to redistribute income. Indirect taxes are taxes on expenditure. When you spend money, you're spending them on goods and services. These, by definition, are regressive. So the best thing to do is to reduce your reliance on indirect taxes. Now, there are also other policies to redistribute income, right? Policies to reduce inequality of opportunities by expanding the opportunities for the poor. Policies to invest in human capital, like providing universal college education, free college education for everybody, regardless of whether they're rich or poor. Transfer payments, like unemployment benefits, okay? Child allowances. Some countries will pay you an allowance for every child you have. Single parent allowances. All of these allowances and unemployment benefits are all transfer payments. If you have generous transfer payments, okay, that helps in reducing poverty and inequality. Targeted spending on goods and services, especially merit goods like education and healthcare, and public goods. When you spend on these goods, you are going to reduce the poverty in your community and the levels of inequality. UBI is a very, very ambitious policy, okay? It's probably where we're heading. At some point in our future, we're all going to be receiving UBIs. Why? Because AI and machines will have probably killed off all our jobs. So what are we going to do, right? They have to figure out a way to tax the output created by the machines and the AI, and then give everybody a UBI, universal basic income, basically. Everybody gets an amount, a fixed amount every month, say $2,000. You can do with that $2,000 whatever you want. If you want to go get a job and make more money, great. If you want to sit at home and paint, great. If you want to take that $2,000 and go to school, go to college, better yourself, great. It's a very ambitious policy, but guess what? Okay, guess what? There have been experiments and it has actually been very successful. Many people fear that if you give everybody a universal basic income, nobody will look for work. That hasn't been the case. Because the reality is we are not built as creatures. We're not built to just sit around and do nothing. We like to have purpose. It's much better to give people a minimum standard of living and then allow them to really pursue that purpose. If they need to go study, they can. If they just want to paint and create art, they can. UBI is the future. Why? Because AI, artificial intelligence, and machines are going to make all jobs probably obsolete at some point. Okay? Might not be in my lifetime, maybe in your lifetime, but UBI is the future. I'm on team UBI. And that's just because I don't want to work. Well, actually, I don't mind working. I just want to do things that I love. Like, this is what I love. All right, policies to reduce discrimination. Any policies to create more fairer opportunities and reduce discrimination will reduce poverty and inequality. And of course, the minimum wage. The minimum wage might create structural unemployment. It might be inefficient, but it's fair because it generates a fair standard of living for those who are employed. All of these policies are basically further policies to reduce poverty and income and wealth inequality, along with taxation. I am done with what I had planned. Questions?